Right, so let's make a new template. So I'm in the Digidelic template set. We'll make a new template, and I'm going to call it test name strap. Okay, and I'm going to save that. So the first thing we need to do is choose which After Effects or Viz scene we want to use, the visuals. So what we're going to do now is upload a Viz archive into the graphics hub that's managed by Ignition Post. So I guess are you guys familiar with Viz Graphics Hub? Perfect. Okay. So this Ignition has a configuration that points to one or more graphics hubs. So this is an external graphics hub, but Ignition manages the connections to those graphics hubs. Okay, so this is a view into a graphics hub here. What I would just like to do now is I'm just going to refresh this button here. Refreshes the list of scenes, so Ignition keeps a list of scenes that it believes are in the graphics hub, but occasionally we have to synchronize those back to what is in the graphics hub. At the moment, there is just your single Digidelic Viz scene that you gave us earlier in the month. What I'm going to do is just upload an archive for a different scene. This is just a very simple name strap. So here it is on my local drive. So that will upload that archive up to the Ignition server and load it into the graphics hub. So it's now telling me it's found those 4 different scenes in the archive. And if I now click on that scene, we can see these different scene variants here with their thumbnails. So this is much like the view into the graphics hub that you get from Graphics Hub Manager, or indeed inside of Viz Artist. So it gives the same. Okay, the next thing we will do is to go back to our template. This is our test name strap that we made just a little while ago, and now we can choose which renderer we want to use for our template. So we can choose either Viz or After Effects. So I'm going to choose Viz for this one, and here are the Viz scenes we just loaded into our graphics hub. So I'm going to choose this scene. Hi. So I think it's a different one. I'm not sure that you had access to this one last time. So this is a very simple little name strap, and we'll see it working in a little while. So we have chosen that Viz scene. Now we'll set up some controls that will allow us to input data into that scene from the Ignition web interface. So this is the templating area of Ignition Post. So we have a number of different what we call controls that we can use in Ignition. Some of them are related to data feeds, and some are just very basic input controls. So okay, so I'm gonna. The Viz scene is a 2-line name strap. So I'm going to start off with a control. This is a user input control that we're going to use for text. We can use it. We can set it to number or image, I'm going to use it for text. Now, on the right hand side, now we can see the viz control objects that are available within the scene. So now by binding this control to the control object within the scene, like so, I can drag the little double-headed arrow. So that's bound this input control to that element within the viz scene. We can overtype the label line 1. This is what the user will see for the label on that control, and here is the default value, the default text that will appear, which we can turn off if we so wish. I'm going to add a second control, and I'm going to bind this one to line 2, like so. And I'm just going to tidy this up a little. We'll call that line 2. The next thing that we will do is just try this template out and see how it looks so far. We'll add a little more in a moment, but first we'll just try this template out. So I'm going to go back to my web interface, and I'm going to hit the refresh here. So now I can see we have a manual name strap, a test name strap. This is the template we just created. This little pencil icon here means that the template has not yet been published. So your users won't get access to this template until I've published it back in Ignition using this button. So this allows us to test as we develop, test the functionality, and only when we're happy we can then publish it to the users. So just to prove that this is working okay, so we can type data into here and it will be re-rendered by Viz. So this little preview here is being rendered by one of the Viz engines and delivered back to the web browser as a still. So the next job, I think, is there is within the graphic there's a little area to show an image. So the next job we will do is to make some functionality in the template that allows the user to select an image to go in that space. So we will go back to controls and we will add a new user input. This time we will set it to image. Now we can hook that, we can join that up to an image, what we call an image set. So image sets can be found here, back in assets and image sets. So I'm just to test this and show you how it works, I'm going to create a new image set. I'm going to delete this image set called flags, and I'm going to delete it here. That's deleted the images from it. Now I will delete the image set, and I will just show you how to make a new image set that we can use, upload images to that image set, and then use them within our graphic. So we will create a new image set and we will give it a name. Okay, we can set some constraints on the size that we think these images should be. So this is to guard against users selecting images that are too small, do not have sufficient resolution for the graphic. So I could, for example, say that I want these to be square, 512 pixels square. This is, well, we will see in a moment, this is theoretically the minimum size, but Ignition will still allow you to use images which are small, but it will warn you that they are too small. So I'm going to click the upload button, and we have some images here. So we can choose any of these, Chad and Denmark, Cuba, and upload those images. So we can see here that these images are all fine. If I click on here, it shows the size of the image and gives us a preview. If I was to now change this and say, well, actually these images should be this size, 1000 pixels, now it's showing me a little warning that these images are out of bounds. So it will still let you use them, but it warns you that it may not look great. And equally, we can upload something. This one is a US flag. Again, this one it's saying is the wrong size. So this time it's saying that the aspect is incorrect. So we now have an image set called flags. If we now go back to our template area, we can choose that image set, flags. And we can choose which the default image we want. So we'll say that Chad should be the default. Okay, so now if we go back to our template, back in the web browser, and I'm going to refresh. So this time, what I didn't do, I just noticed because we added the flag control, but it's not updating. Now that is because I missed a crucial step, which is the binding. So I missed to bind the flag control object onto the flag control. So if I now go back and refresh once more to get the latest version, so now it's picked the correct one. Yeah. So we will show that process in a minute. So the name of the file does not need to match. So when it comes to data-bound graphics, we have a system that we call hooks that allow us to bind control objects within the vScene or layers within After Effects to data within the feed, but through a separate layer that we call hooks. Okay. One other thing that we can just talk about before we go on to the more complicated template is versioning. So if I was, let's imagine that we have finished this template now and that we're happy to publish it. So if I now publish this, and I now go back to this web interface and refresh, you'll now notice that the pencil icon has gone. So this is now a published version of the template that your users can now access. If I want to go back and make a change to that template, I can click this button here, create a new version. So what that means is I can now begin to work on this template and add further controls. I'll call this line A. Meanwhile, the users can continue working with the original version until we republish the template. So this allows this allows people who are building templates to work on new versions of the templates, but still allow the users to continue working on the old version until the new version is ready. So I think the next thing will be to look at a data bound graphic and just explain a little how that will work. So for this we will work with some data in Excel, and we will just show how to build the player profile Excel graphic that you've had access to before. So this is from your After Effects project, and we'll bind it to some data that's in Excel. Okay, so a very similar process to the Viz one, this test name strap. We'll make a new template, and we'll call it test player profile. Okay, this time we want to use an After Effects scene rather than Viz, and you'll see it works in just the same way. So Ignition doesn't, the workflow and the design process works just the same whether you're working with Viz or with After Effects. What I will now show is how, just as we uploaded an archive file, a Viz archive file into Ignition, I would like to show how we upload an After Effects project. So I'm just going to open an After Effects solution, which you should recognize. Okay, so this is your After Effects project. Now, one thing that I just do need to point out is your project very sensibly used a Photoshop file with layers that can be animated on and off within After Effects. At the moment, we do not support the Photoshop layers. It's a piece of work that we'll begin on very soon, but to make this work we have to take each Photoshop layer and convert it into a PNG file and work with that. Okay, so we now have After Effects open. So to export that project and upload it into Ignition, there is an extension. So if I have mine installed already, but just to show you, on the Adobe Exchange, there is this extension called Ignition Post Package Exporter. So this, once you download this and bring it into After Effects, it allows you to export the package, what we call a package, into Ignition Post. So the package consists of the project file and all the assets that are referenced by the project file and a manifest file to join them up together. So if we go back to After Effects and Window, Extensions, Ignition Post Package Exporter. So this is reading the After Effects project, and it's asking us first which compositions we would like to export. So we will choose just to export main, and once we have done that, we can choose which frame we want to choose for the preview. So just as with Viz, we have a preview frame. So I think this one, so we can choose, and it will re-render the correct frame. So this one looks representative. Everything is animated in at this point. So next we will choose which layers we want to export. So these this is has a parallel to within Viz. We have control objects. So in After Effects we took the decision to have a light touch on the After Effects project. So you don't need to include any additional plugins on layers to expose them to Ignition. It's just a question of exploring through the different layers and marking the ones that we want to be able to use within Ignition in here. So we can browse through the different elements here, and we will choose the background, which is the stadium image layer, and we will choose these. We want this one. Then in compositions, we want these two, and we want the match score, and in here we want these layers, and then this is a bit of donkey work here, but we'll just quickly go through them. For each of the profiles, we want the label and the value. Yep. Yes. So this, all we see here is a view into the same layers that we can see here in Photoshop. So this panel, it's called in After Effects they're called CEP, Community Extension Panels. So there is some code running inside this panel that is inspecting the After Effects project and allowing us to have some control over which elements in that After Effects project we want to export. So the view that we see here inside this panel, it is the After Effects project. So the important thing when we designed Ignition Post is that we wanted our customers to be able to template their own graphics. So we wanted you to be able to have control, full control of how you use the system, and you don't need to come back to Idonics to have. Correct. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So this, at the moment, I can't select them here, but it's the exact same project. So it's just browsing through the exact same layers that are available in the project. So once we have decided which of these we want to expose, because we wouldn't necessarily want to expose every layer, because we don't need to set, we just need to expose the ones that we want to set fresh data into. So we've decided which control items we want to use. Now we go to export and we choose where we want to export this package. We call it an Ignition Post package and .ipp file. And now I'm going to hit the export button. So it's now working through the project, gathering all the assets it requires and generating an IPP file. And the IPP file is simply a zip file containing all the constituent components. Okay, so that is the work complete in After Effects. So we've now exported that package. So I'm going to close After Effects. If we now go back to our assets area, and when we were working with Viz, we uploaded our Viz archive on the Viz Scenes tab. This time we will go to After Effects Scenes. We will click the Import a New Package File button, and here's the package file that we just made in After Effects. So that package file is now being imported and uploaded to Ignition. So here it is, it's called Player Profile. Here's the preview frame that we chose when we selected which composition we wanted to use. Because it is possible, in this instance we just chose one, it is possible to allow multiple compositions within a single package, so that we can automate different compositions. This time we just have one. Sure. Yeah. There's just the composition that we chose. So that IPP file has one. We call them in Ignition. We call them scenes, but really they are in After Effects. They equate just to compositions in After Effects. So the one we chose has a single composition, but we could have exported more than one composition out of a single project. You'll see that this one, there's another project here we have called FF Charts, Full Form Charts. This one has 3 separate compositions included. So that means when we come to do the templating, we can choose which of those compositions we want to use. For the one we've just done, we just have a single composition. Yeah. Yes, the ones that are referenced. So if your main composition is referencing other compositions, then they will be included. Okay, so on the right hand side, these are all the layers that we exported when we were in the panel within After Effects. We were choosing which layers we wanted. So these are all those layers that we chose to export. Okay, sure. So if we go back to our templates area now, here is our test player profile. And now we have this new, under After Effects, we have a new option, which is player profile. And here's the one that we chose. So just to go back to the point I was making a moment ago, in FF Charts, because there were 3 separate compositions included, we can choose any one of those compositions to use. For ours, we just have one. So I'm going to choose that composition, and now this template is ready to work with that composition. So the next piece of work that we need to do is to set up the data feeds, the data for this graphic. So we want to work with Excel data. So we go to our data tab, and we go to data provide, no, to lookups. So lookups are our Excel-based data. So I'm going to create a new one, and we will call it profile data. And I will import this lookup from an Excel file. So if we have a quick look at the Excel file, it's this one. So there are columns for each element of data. So the first row is the column names. So there are rows for different photos, for scores, and so on. And here under language, we'll see how this works in a little while. We have a language code that will tell Ignition how to which text to use for certain elements within the graphic. So in this spreadsheet, the columns that we define are the ones that Ignition will use. So you can make a spreadsheet however you like, give it the column names that you wish. When we import it into Ignition, that we will then join up to those particular column names. So at the moment, yeah. So any graphics using this, any graphics that use this data have to follow this template. But of course, you can have other templates that use different data. You can, of course, as well, if you need to, you can have the same. You can have 2 different templates with the same After Effects composition, but bound to 2 different kinds of data. So you could have, just as I believe in the system that you have been using, we had the same template, one with manual input data and one with data coming from Excel. And we could have a third one with data coming from Opta, for example, but all sharing the same After Effects scene. So we will import our player profile. So you can see now it's brought this data in and it's given us these column names. So the next thing we need to do is in our data providers in our static data provider, we need to tell the data provider that we have a new, we call in Ignition we call them schemas. So a schema could be, in this case, it's our Excel file, profile data. Equally, in the case of Opta, so we've added our profile data to the schema. So for the Opta data, these schemas are delivered by the data service, and these are all XML schemas. So within Ignition, we work with Excel, we work with XML, or we work with JSON. We work with any kind of data, but once the data is in the system, we treat it in the same way. So the templating process can be the same whether you're working with Excel data or data from XML data feeds. Okay, so now on this screen, this is where we talked about our hooks. So this is where we build the hooks. So in static data, I'm going to hit the refresh button, and now we have this new schema called profile data. This is the one that we have just brought into the system, and now we can see the data in a unified format. So within Ignition, we have a unified schema format that allows us to work with data in this generic way. So here is Excel data, and if we go back to the football one, and we go to this, so this is Excel, this is XML data, but it works in just the same way as the Excel. I will go back to my profile data, and now when we're in the screen, we can browse through all the different columns. If we click here and on peek at sample data, we just get a view into the file. So these are the 3 rows. So here's the first row, and the second, and the third. Now, to allow us to work in an easy way with this data, we create what we call hooks. So I'm going to select the item, so that this is a list element within the schema, and I'm going to create a hook into that data. So that gives us, this is what's called a list hook, because it knows there are a list of items below it. So it gives us these 2 elements here called index and count, because it knows it's a list. So I hope it's okay, this I'm not too technical for you, because we're okay. I'll tell you what, let me if I make my screen a little larger, that might be easier. Just bear with me. So this one. Is that easier for you? Do you see it more clearly? Yeah. Is it? Okay. Okay. Well, let me turn off the sharing, and we'll turn it back on again like we did before, and hopefully that will help. That's better. Good. So yeah, if the same problem happens again, let me know, and we'll see if we can fix it. Okay. So I'm now going to add some more elements to this, to more hooks into this data for the items that we want to use. We won't do them all for this because it may take a little while, but we'll add the ones that we think will be useful. So I'm going to add the key. So the key is the unique element within that data that allows us to select the information. The language is the language column, EN or JP in the data, and we will just go through and select some more of these. So this process you only have to do once when you define the schema. Once these hooks are in place, you can then use this data within any template. Correct. Yes. Yeah, exactly. We've got to, I'm just going to quickly whiz through the rest of them. Try point. We're nearly there, we may as well do them all. That one, I've got too many. I'm going to take that one off. So this is all the data that's in the file. What we need to do, though, is for the graphic, do I have that one handy? The column with the profile data, we need Japanese text or English text, depending on whether it's a Japanese, the graphic is to be Japanese or English. So to do that, we have another lookup. So which will contain the translations. So this file called label lookup, which we'll just have a look at in Excel. So you'll have to excuse me because I used Google Translate to find the Japanese text. So you'll probably find it makes no sense to you whatsoever. Okay, okay. Well, half isn't too bad. I thought it would be much worse. You'll see for each label, so that we have key and value, and then we have try_en for the English text and try_jp for the Japanese. So for each element, we have the English and the Japanese. If you wanted to have a third language, that would be easy. We just add separate rows for the third language. So, we will now go back and add a lookup. Okay, we'll add a new one, and we'll call it language or label languages, and we'll save it. And just as we did with the profile data, we will import that Excel, and here it is. Now for this, because we don't want to actually use this as a schema, it's just a lookup for text. We don't need to go through the step that we went through with the other one and to convert it to a schema. All we need to do now is come back into our templating area, and we add what we call some composite hooks. So the composite hooks allows us to do these data translations. So on our items list, we can add a new composite hook, and here it is, and we'll call it try label, and we'll say we want to use there are different modes. We're going to choose format string, and the way that we want this to work, we need to call it try underscore. So this will tell us to look up into the file the correct language. So this element here, the 0, is a placeholder for the language, so that would be EN or JP. So for that to work, we need to tell that we tell the system we want to use language. Just bear with me a second. That we want to use the language field here to do the lookup. And on the lookups tab, we want to use a specific lookup file, label languages, and we want to look up into the value column because it has a key and a value. So that file could have multiple additional columns. In this instance, there's only one, but we need to, and that's the one we need to choose value. So if we now look at this on the right-hand side, this is a peek, what we call a peek into that sample data, and we can now see for the 3 rows in the main Excel file, the first 2 are English, the third was Japanese. So this composite hook here knows to translate and use the Japanese for that row. So we could continue to add more of these, but for the moment I think that's enough to show how that works, because we have to make full use of the graphic, we need to add these same text lookups for the other values that you're using in the graphic. For example, there are pieces of text, height, weight, and such like. So we have our data now, I think, that we can use. So if we go back to our template and to the controls, this is where we will add the bindings now to data rather than input controls that we used with the viz lower third strap graphic. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose a data selector, and we need to choose the right schema, and it's this one, profile data. So you'll notice that we can choose many different schemas. There are many different data providers. This one is data from Transport for London, so this would give us data on tube lines in London. The one we want is our profile data. Okay. We will now add some data item selector. We want it to use this data selector, and we want to use information from the items list, and we need the key value. This allows us to choose which row we want from the Excel file. Now we'll add another data item. So now we can start to, these elements are starting to place specific data into the graphic. So it's using this profile data, and we want to choose, this is for the background information. So this is now hooking into the background column from the Excel file. And this time we want to use, it's not text, it just references an image in our image set. So we can choose our stadiums image set, and we'll see that we have these two preloaded. So just like with our flags, we have stadiums. We can add as many of these as we wish, and these are the values, stadium 01, stadium 02, that appear in the Excel file to allow it to choose the correct image. So we can continue to add further items. We can add another data item. This one we'll use the player photo. And again, this is an image, but this time it's for players. So one thing that we missed to do here, an important part, just as we have to do with Viz, is bind it to the correct layer in Excel. So for the background, this is the background image. So within the Excel, within the After Effects layers, we have a background. Oh. This is the After Effects layer that we want to bind it to. We join it up to the data just in the same way that we did with the Viz. And likewise for the player. Here's the player photo, and again we can bind it. So what we could do now, before we add any more elements, we could just go and have a look, just as we did with Viz, and we could go and have a look and see how this is looking in our web browser. So back on our web interface, and I will refresh. And here's our graphic test player profile. And just with the Viz one, the little icon shows us that at the moment it's a working version and not ready for publication. So the first time we preview it, it may take a little while because we're now uploading our project and the assets up to the After Effects and the AME engines. So the first time, here's our graphic. We can now choose this selector chooses which row from the Excel that we want to use. So we choose that row, and it will re-render the preview. Something's not quite right because it's not redrawing it correctly. So I have missed something crucial from my list of things. Just bear with me. Right. The data select, I've chosen the incorrect for these elements. We should be joining to this selector, not the top one. If I come back and we'll refresh, so hopefully this time it's chosen the correct background. So that was simply a mistake on my part in choosing the wrong data selector. So we could go and explore adding further controls if you wish, but this sort of demonstrates the principle. Would you like to see adding more controls, or would you rather move on to a different area? Should we see more? Sure. Some text information. Sure, great. So let's choose the next thing, and that's what would be a good one. We can do some sort of fairly simple ones, I guess. So we can just shrink these, and we'll add this one. We'll use selector. This time we'll choose a team name. So this time we'll bind, so this one is the home team name within the Excel. So in After Effects it's called team name _ home. And perhaps one other thing that we could do would be to show how one of the translations is working. So we'll add another data item. This time we'll use try. Oh. And we'll add one more. And this time we'll choose the try label. So this shows the translation working. So I need to find the. So okay. So this one in the After Effects scene, it's the stats. We'll bind it to the stats section. So for the try label, we'll bind to the label text, and the try value, the number of tries that actually come out of the Excel sheet, we'll bind to this one. So this time so this is 2 tries that have come. Do you see in the preview? So here this time it's 2 tries that's come from the Excel file, and the try text here has come from our lookup, our label spreadsheet. If we flip this to Japanese, this time we see it in Japanese. So that has come from the lookup. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I beg your pardon? Yeah, yeah, sure, exactly. Yeah. This one? Okay, so for text is straight input text. as soon as we let's actually, if we go back to our name strap, because this is probably better and easier to see. So I'm just going to create a new version and go back to our controls. So this top one, when we choose text, we have these different options available to us, which, for example, allow us to choose the maximum length that the user can type in, and whether the text should be treated any specific way, whether it should be forced into uppercase or proper case. On our data bound one, on the text field, home team name, because this one knows that it's bound to data, text that's bound to data, if we click this box, then in addition to it being bound to the data, we can show it on the user interface, and we can give it a label here. And if we click this box, allow edit, it then gives us the same features that we had on the name strap box. So we can, if we do this and go back to our template, this is the value that's the new field that we've added, because we checked that little box, show to user, and it's brought, this shows me the text that's come from the Excel file. What I can do is now overtype it by clicking that button. So that was the option to allow users to edit. I can only type 10 characters because on the control I said only 10, maximum length 10. Correct. So if I click this button, it will just revert the value back into to what was in the file. So any changes we make here are just within this graphic, not in the data. It's just overriding the values that are in the data. We can do, I think, the same thing. So, for example, let's go back to our name strap, the easier example. We can choose number. So what this does, it's an easier way of allowing us to get numeric data into that value rather than text. So we can set a default value, we can set its step, we can set that there's one decimal place, and it's got to be at least 0.1, no, 0.5, for example, but we can go to any max value. If we now go back to our template, this one. So now this one has turned into a numeric field that I can't turn below 0.5. So those options give us control over what kind of data we're working with, basically. Num position is the only one. So to be honest, I'm not. I don't remember what this one is for. I don't use it very often. I think I know what this is for. This allows us. This is a special control that gives us 3 different parameters, X, Y, and Z. I think. Let me just go back to the template and see. So X and Y. So this gives us. I think this was built for football formation graphics. So a formation graphic lays out the positions of each team member on the field. So this in a single field allows us to move players around the field in X and Y. Yeah, I'm not sure we have a graphic, a Viz template that will show you that working. That's available to us right now. Obviously it depends on how the system is treating the data in the background. I think in the graphic we use this with, there is some script within the Viz scene for moving elements around based on those bound elements of data. But you can see here in the little preview, I guess, can you just about see it? It's just treating this as a triplet of numbers, X, Y, and Z. So it depends on how, within the binding in the graphic, how you use that data. So there are lots of other controls in here. For example, if we had a user option control, let's try a. So user option control allows us to turn it into a drop down. So for line 2, we can bind that one. And now we can add a new so back in the we now have this control line 2, which now we can have a choice. So rather than the user typing information in, we have a choice. So you'll notice that the choice field, that it's showing the numbers here. Do you see in the preview? That's because we have a lookup, the description and the value. So this is what appears in the list that the user can select from. These are the values that are sent to After Effects or to Viz, depending on which choice the user makes. Oh. 1, 2, 3. So now the text that's appearing is 1, 2, 3. Sure. So that there is, because I think it's for us to go through everyone would take a long time in the demo, but in the screen there's a help system. So this template controls, control types, user input control, sure, data options. So all this information is in the help system. Yeah. So sure. Yeah. Perfect. Great. So I mean, really, this is the bulk of what we've needed to talk about. We've now done in the templating area. So I can just talk to you briefly about the other important sections within Ignition Post. So if we start off by looking at user management, So this is the list of users within the system. So we can make a new user. So this is the account that I made for Digidelic. At the moment, it's just given operator permissions. I can now give it template editors and administrators and save. So next time you log in, you will get these extra tabs available to you. So we can create as many users as we wish. Depending on, we have a quite extensive security controls within Ignition Post. So we have a number of different password policies. So this will enforce password complexity and how often users need to change their passwords, all of that kind of thing. So if if you are just an operator, then you need to change your password every 100 days. It needs to be at least 7 characters long. If you're an administrator, we can make the length 15 characters. So it makes the requirement, if you're an administrator, to have a stronger password. If you're both an operator and an administrator, then it will choose the most restrictive. So if you are now Digidelic is an operator and an administrator, you will now need to have a 15-character password. Because this isn't a production system, I'm going to revert that back to 7. But in a production system, I think you would have stricter controls. Another important part of the process is security logs, so that we can see all the logins and failed login attempts every time a password was changed. You had a difficulty yesterday, I think, when your account became locked, so we can see when that happened. So this is important. We also have a system not yet deployed onto this. Perhaps we do have it. Yeah, so we have this system monitoring tab. So under system monitoring, this will give you a view into system health of the system. So it can tell you whether the viz engines are healthy and connected, whether the drop locations are healthy. So any errors that occur will appear in this system, and it can be configured to send emails when there is a problem. So you can proactively monitor the system. And as part of that, within the security section here, we can have the system alert if there are many attempted logins. So if some external party is trying to perform a brute force attack on the system by repeatedly trying to log in, it will lock their account, and then it can alert you through the screen and through an email that someone is trying to compromise the system. In here, green is good, amber is warning. So basically there have been errors, but now it's come good again. Yeah, and red obviously is an error. So I think when it goes red, we don't have any in this system at the moment in red state, but you can if you can right click on it and acknowledge the error. So then it will revert it back to yellow to show that there have been errors, but you have investigated the problem. Yeah, I mean, basically what this screen is really about, monitoring the system for overall health. So information will appear in here when something goes bad. It doesn't tell us every interaction with external systems. We can get at that information in more detail if you wish, depending on which area we want to look at. So in the renders section, this will give us an overview of what's happening within the render pipeline. One of the things that we can get in here, this is log information from the data provider. So in here we can see every request that has gone to the data provider. So if you're using Opta, we would show Opta data in here. So we can see every request, whether it was successful or not. And if we wish, we can open up the file and see the information behind it. So that's for data feeds. We can see in the current requests, this gives us a view into the render pipeline. So for administrators, again, if I'm just going to put this to one side, and if I was to render this file, we can see it's gone into the render queue here. Oh, it has an error, but nevertheless you can see this is because of a bad configuration on the viz, I think. However, when they come into when we ask them to render here, we can see they appear in this queue, and they've stalled because they are failed renders. So an administrator can see the failed renders in here, and we can, if we want, we can try and restart them, and it's failed again. If we were to do an After Effects one, so that's the one we were just doing, and we'll just choose a small file because it's quicker, and we render that one. So again, we can see the status of that render in this queue, and we can now see it's rendering. That one worked okay, and it's now popped off the queue. So these just show the active ones. On recent, this one, yeah. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So basically, there are a number of different sections here. So depending on which area of the system, so we can see for the football XML data provider, this is in amber state. So by clicking this. So yeah, and we can, if we click this button, we solo this, we call soloing the log file. These are just the errors that have occurred with this data provider. So we can scroll through and see what the issues were. And if we wish, we can click this button. We can say, okay, there was a problem, now it's been fixed. We click this. We've acknowledged the error, and it's gone back to green. The same with this one. So that tells us health of the data feeds. Yes, exactly. So you can have it set up in a number of ways. So if we enable, if we click this button, then it will check through every element within the system for its current health. If we click this button, it will, on a timer in the background, every now and again it will go off and automatically check the health of each thing. I think if I go, just to see how that works, if we go to this section, output config, and we go to viz, and I'll tell you what we'll do. If we go to drop location, this is where we set up our output paths. So when we've completed our render, this is the where we want the file to be delivered. So what I'm going to do, this is to an SFTP server. So I'm just going to put an invalid username here. If I now go back to our system monitoring tab and go to our drop locations, if I now do a check, so it now says it's failed, authentication has failed. If we have this enabled, this enable active monitoring, it will continually check that the health of that system. So I'm going to put that back to the correct username. And I check now. And now it tells me it's come good. So this screen is here for an overview of across the whole system to make sure everything is working. With the option here to email. So this one, if we click this button, it will send it an email to all the administrator users. So in here, anybody who is an administrator will get an email when something goes wrong. The other thing that you can do for your monitoring, if you have external, here at Idonics we use a network monitoring system that's independent of Ignition Post. So there are a number of those around. The most common one, I think, is called Nagios. So if we go, so this is an HTML page that we can inspect from an external system that will tell us the health of the system. So we can, with an external monitoring system, we can inspect the health of Ignition. And I think there is another one. This one needs authentication, but this one will give us more in-depth detail. Are we? Okay, cool, great. So we have looked at the system monitoring and security and users. Next, I think we could look at this section, which is output config. So this is where we define what we call output. So these are the drop locations. So for this one, we say it's an SFTP, and we give it a name. And in this section are the configuration details for how we connect to it. So if you have, for example, if you have a media asset management system, we can have a plugin drop location that knows how to talk to your media asset management system through its API. This is where you would define the credentials. In this section, this defines how we want the file to be named. So there are these various little replaceable sections within curly braces. So this means when we generate a file and deliver it into that particular location, it will go into a folder called Digidelic player profile, and the file will have the date time, the current date time in the name. There are a number of different options here we can choose. So this is where we define drop locations. These two tabs, one for After Effects and one for Viz, is where we define the Viz engines that we have connected to the system, and the After Effects and AME engines. So here are the graphics hubs. We can define one or more graphics hubs. And this is we saw this section just a little while ago when we were uploading the Viz archive. So for each graphic hub, we can have a number of separate connections. So we can have main and backup graphic hubs available. This will tell us the scenes that are available on that graphics hub. This is where we uploaded the archives. And then we can have multiple pools of engines. So the idea of a pool of engines is that we can have ignition posts can be distributed based on geographic lines. So for example, you could have one server, say, in Tokyo, and you could have another server, perhaps if you're doing a large outside broadcast, or indeed if you have a satellite station in another city, you can have another smaller ignition post server with renderers that are just local to that secondary server. So you can define two different pools, one for each location, and then depending on which template and output configuration the user chooses when they want to render the graphic, or indeed the automatic graphic rendering from data, the system can automatically choose to render it in the right, on the right site, in the right location. Yes, exactly. So for this demo system, there are two VizRT engines in our server room here in the UK. So these two engines are in a rack next in the server room. When we define engines, we can make as many engines as we like and add them into pools. Well, theoretically, that's possible. However, the issue is with network connectivity. So our server here is on a local network, it would need to be able to see your viz engines on your network. So that would probably require an IPsec tunnel or something setting up between the two networks. So I think probably that's, for a demo, that's too hard. But that could be done. That could be done. But for a demo, I think it would be, there are too many security issues, I think. For each engine, we can see the traffic. So yes, for our system, there are two engines that are dedicated to Ignition Post. Yeah, yeah. But you can have as many. You just have one. If it depends, you can have as many as you want. Yeah. So we can see here all the traffic that's being passed to the engines. So this is each individual message that's being. Yeah. 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 You can do that, because we explored how to do that. So on the Assets tab, go to Viz Scenes, and we upload and import Viz Archive. So you can do this. Yeah. So at the moment we have an Ignition Post server and a Viz graphics hub that is just dedicated to the Digidelic trial. So no other apart from internally at Idonics, no other people have access to this graphics hub. And when you're finished, we will tear it down and make sure none of your Viz scenes remain in our hub. So what else is there to explore? I think, to be honest, we've looked at most of the important things. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if you have any further questions. Sure, sure, of course. Yeah, yeah. So I will. So, yeah, no, you go ahead. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah. The only thing of course we would have to bear in mind is the time difference. Yeah, but there's a slot where we are both available, so that would be fine, I think. Yes. So I'm just going to turn off the screen capture, the screen record for the moment.